about these ideas of youthfulness. Read with me in Ecclesiastes 11, starting in verse 9, and we'll read into 12:1. Rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and the sight of your eyes, but know that for all these things God will bring you into judgment. Remove vexation from your heart, and put away pain from your body, for youth and the dawn of life are vanity. Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them. Before we get into this section we're really going to start class with tonight, there is this encouragement near the end of this book to say, hey, rejoice while you're young. And one of the points we talked about last week was, you're as young now as you're ever going to be. And so whether or not we're going to get into discerning who is the proper audience for this or who ought to listen to this, the answer is better take it as soon as you can. Because the sooner you appreciate this piece of wisdom, this little nugget, the better it'll serve you. And we had, I think, a really good discussion and comments about the balance of this verse with verses like Jeremiah 17:9 that talks about how deceitful and deceptive the heart can be and totally sick. And so this Ecclesiastes says, follow your heart. And Jeremiah says, your heart is completely untrustworthy. Don't do anything with it. And I think Christians, we find ourselves in the middle of the tension here a lot of times. Anything about this question we did class last week with before we get into the rest of chapter 12? It's important to get our minds geared. I know it's a quick, to hit the ground running, to get our minds geared on the idea of youthfulness here, because it's going to prepare us for the next question in the next section of this chapter. Any thoughts about this?
It's a bummer getting old.
Yeah, that's what we're going to read in a second, Lance. That's a good point. It is a bummer getting old.
Still being young too.
Yeah, it can be this balance of enjoying life and remembering God's judgment it's simply put, but it's hard to grab onto. It's hard to wrap your arms around this idea, and really to be stretched between these two ideas. I want to enjoy my life and follow my heart, but I know that God's going to judge me, right? Those are tough concepts. All right, let's keep pushing on. Can I get a volunteer to read Ecclesiastes 12, verses 2 through 7 for us? Ecclesiastes 12, verses 2 through 7. Ricky, go ahead, please.
While the sun and the light, the moon and the stars are not darkened, and the clouds do not return after the rain, in the day when the keepers of the house tremble, and the strong men bow down, when the grinders cease, because they are few, and those that look through the windows grow dim. 2 and 3, right?
Through 7, sorry.
Through 7, okay. When the doors are shut in the streets, and the sound of grinding is low, when one rises up at the sound of a bird, and all the daughters of music are brought low. Also, they are afraid of height and of terrors in the way. When the almond trees blossom, the grasshopper is a burden, and the desire fails. For man goes to his eternal home, and the mourners go about the streets. Remember your Creator before the silver cord is loosed, or the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher shattered at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the well. Then the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. Mm-hmm. 8?
Right, sure, read 8 too. That's part of it.
Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. All is vanity.
All right, thanks, Rick. Yeah. So what picture is this? What's being illustrated here? Todd?
Well, all these are metaphors for, your grinders are seizing, that's your teeth. Mm-hmm. You're strong, your legs are not going to work. It's going to be a burden to pick up a grasshopper.
Yeah.
Just a lot of different things. The almond trees blossom, your hair is going to get gray if you have it. Mm-hmm. The grasshopper's desire, you're not going to want to go out of your house. It's very depressing. So he's just emphasizing these things are going to happen. And so remember God before these things happen. And then when they do happen and you know God, you know where you're going to go.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's really the emphasis, right? Like this, as much as these pictures are illustrative, right? They really paint a picture for us about growing old. And I appreciate kind of the imagery and the poetic imagery. Like this is, as I think we should talk about this last week, as painful or as hard as these lines can be, they are also beautifully written. This is beautiful imagery to describe a part of life that we often would rather not think about. And our culture maybe particularly, I don't know, we're always prisoners of the moment, right? So forgive me if this is true of all times. But our culture seems especially kind of phobic of dealing with old age. Whether it's Hollywood and all kind of the forever young kind of pictures, or just nursing homes and assisted living homes and all these kind of senior living facilities where we kind of just shuffle all the people that are undesirable off into their own places and we never visit them or care about them anymore. Like, these are just horrific things. There's a lot of cultures and current cultures, but I think historically too, it was just such a wisdom and age were revered, and the responsibilities that younger families had towards their older family members were taken seriously, not passing the buck off to somebody else. And these pictures might be especially difficult for a culture that never, ever pays any attention to the old, right? When we think, well, that's never going to happen to me, and by the time, I hope I die before this happens. I might say horrible things about these pictures, but these pictures are really important to see because this is, in some sense, the physical goal of life is to get old, to live long enough to see these things come true. And what a reward for a long life, right? But he says in verse 1, you pointed this out, Todd, remember your Creator in the days of your youth before the evil days come and the years draw near, of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them. As imagery laden as verses 2 through 7 was, verse 1 might be something that some of us have said, some of us in this audience. Man, there's just nothing, there's no pleasure in this life right now. I'm not trying to put words in anybody's mouth, but this is what he says, that there are days that are going to come where you say, there's nothing super enjoyable about this. And the point is, like Todd made well, that it's good to have your faith founded and your life enjoyed, but also kind of engage with God before those days come where it's going to be even harder. Maybe his point is almost impossible to find a lot of joy in the earthly sense, where faith becomes even more important and more central the older we get. So why do you think the preacher ends his words with these pictures? I mean, the words of the whole book. Why do you think this is towards the end, right? These are the last kind of words of the preacher before the framer of the book will finish up in the next verses 9 through 14. Why do you think these are the final words of the preacher? Les?
Well, we've seen through Ecclesiastes there's been a lot of references to youth and aging, and
Sure.
so forth. So this is, the end of chapter 11, we're talking about youth, and now he's talking about age. It's just bringing it all together, saying, this is what it is, so make sure you're in tune with the Creator, because he created everything and wants you to have a good life and so forth. Just be aware.
Yes. Yeah. Good. Other thoughts? Any other thoughts? Yeah, one day you're going to be old. Thankfully, no one here tonight is old. None of us are old. We're young as we'll ever be. But one day you will be old. One day I'll be old. And these things will be truer than maybe I would like them to be. And the point of Ecclesiastes is to understand life under the sun. And you can't understand life without understanding it in the context of death or understanding the context of its darkest days. And the preacher makes us think about those things, maybe if we don't, even if we don't want to. That's kind of the point of this whole book. The seasons of life, whether you like it or not, there's good times and bad times. So much, the brevity of life. This book is chock full of these reminders of the darker parts of life. And even if you have the best life in the world, the preacher is dead set on reminding us that somebody else doesn't. And so even if your life is peachy right now, Ecclesiastes is written to remind us that life is full of these things, and it is actually full of it for everybody. Jan?
Then my friends should stop saying that I'm no fun anymore. Don't you think?
I think so. Yeah, yeah, they should stop saying that. It's just so important to take hold of these things, right? And to see them for what they are, because he's trying to show us that this is life under the sun. This is the earthly life that we have. And if we don't wrap our arms around it, then we're going to live in denial. What's the best option? If we can't engage with these things, then we'll be ill-equipped when they come. And if we don't have these enjoyable days where we had faith in God, then these days will be maybe even harder than they have to be. Any other thoughts about that? About this section? Go ahead, Les.
You know, the world we live in, scientists have kind of taken over to, you know, fountain of youth, or they can do things for you and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, what for? God's in control. They're not in control. But what has happened in the world today is that people believe more in science than they believe in God sometimes. And that's, I think this book is clearly telling you, you got to have that faith. You got to have some point reference, if you will, not just, oh, today the science says this, tomorrow the science is going to say this.
Yeah.
This is what God says all the time. It hasn't changed.
Amen. I think that's really well put, and I think you're touching on the kind of one of the main applications for modern applications of this book is this is a great place to start with agnostic, atheistic, secular people. I mean, you can't argue against the logic of the preacher. It's airtight, and for anybody who people are either blocking these things out or, you know, whatever the case, this book is a great book to study with someone who is, I think, atheistic, agnostic, or secular. It's a great thing to read with them. Good. Anything else? Any other thoughts about this? Go ahead.
I think it's hard for a lot of people to come to accept it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's like, so, you know, I see, you know, it's, oh, I got to go get my checkup and, you know, do these, which is good, you know, to take care of your body. But then again, you know, it's inevitable, you know, you're, like it says, you won't be able to chase grasshoppers anymore.
Yeah.
And that's why I see, like, my faith is more, you know, I think about it more often than I would have when I was younger.
Absolutely. I think there's something, you're right, I think part of what he's pointing out is there's a natural kind of progression in that, because it's easy to forget about the judgment in God when you're young and you're invincible, right? Nothing can stop you. But as we get older, these things just start to fail. And that faith in God becomes even more important. I think that's part of the reason he ends his words with this, because he's saying, look, like this is coming for all of us. And we need to have, the earlier we get it, I think part of the point is the earlier we have our faith in God, the earlier we live in the knowledge of the judgment of God, the more we can truly enjoy and appreciate life as it should be now. And then when we get old, we'll have had that time in light of knowing what the future is going to hold and have a complete life under the sun. I think that's what the preacher's ending his words to tell us. Like, you have a complete life. Because some people will read these words and say, well, I got to sow my wild oats now before I can't anymore. And that's the exact opposite point of what the preacher is making. He's saying if you live in understanding, you can follow the joy of your heart and still live within the judgment of God, which is, sometimes Christians feel like, oh, that's dangerous territory. But we have to find that. That's our mission. That's one of our missions in wisdom, is to figure that out. And we can find that and live that. And then when we get old, we'll know that we've, you know, everything will be set like it ought to have been. We'll have lived a life that God wanted us to live. And we can be confident about that. And I think most people, I would wager to guess, all right? I don't know the statistics. I don't have all right? I would wager to guess that most people who have lived in this world do not reach into their life thinking, I am content with the life I lived. And I'm not saying that for scare tactics. I just think that's probably largely true. And as people who understand God and have this book well understood, we have everything we need to be equipped by the time we get to the end of our lives to say, I lived this life God gave me the way he wanted me to and the way I wanted to. That's what the preacher ends with these words, I believe. That's sobering, okay? But it's really important because there's no two ways about it. This is the end. You know, this is the path. One day, this is going to be you and me. And so if we take that to heart now, then we can start living now to when we get there, we can say, yeah, I enjoyed my days when I was young, and I'm enjoying these days I have no pleasure in by my faith in God. That's the preacher's ideal for us. So he goes on. Can I get a volunteer to read the rest of the book? Ecclesiastes 12, verses 9 through 14. Oh, go ahead, Les.
That reminds me of 2 Peter 1:3. If we live by that rule, we'll have a happy life.
Yeah. Yeah, 2 Peter.
God has given us his divine power. He has given us everything we need.
Yes. And yeah, no, that's a good cross-reference. Todd?
Just one verse in light of what we just talked about. This 3:11. 3:11 that He's put eternity in our hearts. I think if we think of, instead of life under the sun, we're going to be thinking of the life, well, after this life and under the sun. I think the idea of always remembering that our life is this little tiny blip and eternity is, well, forever. And it's pretty sobering to think of how we need to live. And, you know, the golden bowl here in verse 6, this is an interesting verse. All the things that you cherish, you know, that silver cord or your golden bowl or your baseball cards that some might collect, you know, and those kinds of things. Or those kinds of things. How you cherish those things. They just don't matter. They're nice, but I really like that verse in 3:11 where eternity is, God put eternity in our hearts for thinking about the future. I think that's important in this whole study. And I think, and you're going to get into it in this next section. So.
Yeah. Do you want to read it actually? You want to read 9 through 14 for us?
And moreover, because the preacher was wise, he still taught the people knowledge. Yes, he pondered and sought out and set in order many proverbs. The preacher sought out to find acceptable words, and what was written was upright words of truth. The words of the wise are like goads, and the words of scholars are like well-driven nails given by one shepherd. And further, my son, be admonished by these. Of many books there is no end, and much study is wearisome to the soul or to the flesh. Let us hear the whole conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is man's all. For God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil.
Thank you. So, this preacher who we've been hearing his words this whole time, what else was he known for? What does it say in verses 9 and 10? Did you say wisdom? He's known for wisdom. What else? Mine says weighing and studying and arranging many proverbs with great care. What else? Verse 10. Yeah, he sought to find words of truth. He wrote words of truth, and he sought to find words of delight. And he uprightly. Who does this sound like? I mean, I think there is some things that do sound like David, you're right, but even more so, I think, even more straight, it sounds like Solomon, especially, right, where he studied and weighed and arranged. I mean, the book of Proverbs is attributed to Solomon and his arrangement. And so the preacher, I mean, Solomon ought to be who we have in mind with everything the preacher says. You know, this to me, this is who it sounds like. And at the beginning of the book, it says something similar, that he was the wisest of anyone who ruled in Jerusalem, and all these ideas. It's interesting, this book doesn't come up straight out and say, hey, Solomon wrote this, these are the words of Solomon. But at every step when it starts telling us stuff about this preacher, it sounds like the life of Solomon. And to go beyond that, you know, that's all I really have to say about that. Any other thoughts about this? It's significant, right, that this book of wisdom would have us keep in mind and be reminded of the wisest who ever lived, who was one of God's, who received this divine gift of wisdom from God himself. This is why part of the reason this is part of the credibility of this book, right? That we ought to pay attention to this, because these are the words of, you know, these remind us of Solomon and his wisdom. Rick?
And for me, I also think of everything that transpired in his life. And he understood with the concubines and the concubines and the wives and all the stuff being the king. At the end of the whole everything, fear God and keep His commandments.
Yeah.
And just like his father David, you know, whether you believe that he made it to heaven or not, everything that he left said for us is valid.
Yeah.
It's you can add it to your life and remember it, and it's golden.
Yeah, yeah.
And in spite of what he was going through, you know, here, there, and the other.
Yeah.
That's you know, whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Understand the wisdom that he exhumed, put out.
Yeah.
Is way beyond anything mistakes that he made.
Yeah. Yeah.
To me.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, you can look at this and you can look at that, but hey, at the end of it, if he can say, fear God and keep his commandments in spite of everything that he went through, that's golden.
Yeah. Yeah, this, you know, I've heard one preacher I respect talk about it this way, that he's like, I don't know, but when I read Ecclesiastes, I hope this is something that Solomon wrote near the end of his life, and then maybe it implies some sort of, you know, turnaround at the end of his life. And I have to say the same thing. That's what I hope. I have my questions. You know, it's interesting, all the enigmatic kind of mysterious ways that the preacher is revealed without just coming out and saying it's Solomon. So I'm always hesitant as someone who likes to, you know, we always say book, chapter, verse, and all these things. Like, it didn't say that Solomon wrote it, and so I'm always hesitant to just be like, hey, Solomon wrote this. But like, that's who we're supposed to think of when we read all these things. Make you think of Solomon if you're a student of the Bible. And I hope that that's the case, that Solomon wrote this near the end of his life, and this means that he had this kind of faith even through all his sins, obvious, glaring sins that he had. Good. But let's keep moving. So as he goes on in verses 11 and 12, how are we to take this admonition about the words of the wise and the making of many books in these two verses? Todd?
Well, there's many books on everything. And, how many self-help books are there out there? There's hundreds and thousands, and you could write forever and all that. I just like the verse 11, that the words of the wise are like goads, and the words of scholars are like well-driven nails. You just can't get it out. They're not going to move. So that's the way I look at the words of this book and the Bible in its entirety. It has everything I need. I mean, I can go to Barnes & Noble and buy hundreds and hundreds of books on, you know, whatever subject, but this is what I need. And
Absolutely.
So maybe that's what I think of when I see these verses.
That's really good. That's really good. Cass over here. And on your, I think that's well said, right? And I like what he says after that. They're given by one shepherd, right? There's one shepherd giving all the good wisdom is from God himself, and it's all from a singular source. Cass?
A lot of productivity advice and self-help advice. I mean, pretty much every self-help book you can read will agree on this one point, and that is, none of this advice matters if you don't do it.
Yeah.
You know, the productivity, the doing is the choke point.
Yeah.
And I think it's pretty much the same here. If you don't follow God and keep his commandments, then all the wisdom in the world doesn't matter.
Yeah. I mean, this idea of goads, do you think of any other verses in the Bible about someone in goads? Yeah, Saul, right, the great persecutor of the church, and Jesus comes to him and says, aren't you tired of kicking against the goads? And we read the book of Ecclesiastes, maybe we should hear this for ourselves. What goads am I kicking it against, you know? How am I, with all the stuff we talk about through this, the brevity of life and the unfairness of life and the absurdity of wealth even, and the pursuit of wealth, all these things, like, do any of these things, are they goading us to rethink how we're living? And are we kicking against those? Les?
Well, I think the one shepherd is probably referring to God in that regard.
I agree.
So we have this here in Ecclesiastes, but what do we have in Galatians 1, 8, and 9?
Yeah.
You don't want to add to it. You want to
Yeah.
take away from it. Mm-hmm. This here is just, telling you that the words of the wise are like collected sayings, firmly embedded nails. Mm-hmm. And you should, Scripture is in a category all itself from any other writing in the world.
Yeah.
And ancient times and everything. Scriptures has its own value above all other writings.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen. Amen.
Then I think it's important for people to know what a goat is.
Yeah.
Too. There's probably people that have no idea. It's just something I don't have a goat at home, but I know farmers do or had, and it's something that points and pokes an animal right. It has a sharp point on it, and you don't like that feeling. It's kind of like a spur, right? So I don't know. Anybody else have any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah.
On what a goat is?
No, it's a great picture, right? No, I think that is it's good to it's
a prod. Right?
Yeah.
You're poking people to move.
Yeah. Yeah. It gets senseless animals moving in the right direction.
I gotta come up as provoke, annoy, stimulate some action and reaction.
Yeah. Provoke. These things all are supposed to push us in the right direction. And it's used for senseless animals, basically, right? That's kind of the point. And this idea, like you brought this up, Les, beware of anything beyond these, of making many books there is no end, and much study is a weariness of the flesh. I think this is, first of all, I love this verse just because of what it says on the face of it. Just don't get overly involved in it's an endless process. All the pursuit of all these things. And it's almost like the preacher and the compiler of these things in Ecclesiastes, who put the book together, says, hey, this is it, in a sense. Like, Ecclesiastes is all you need, is kind of the claim he's making at the end of this book. And he's saying, you can weary yourself finding but I got the best for you right here. Again, a lot of these things are like really big claims of credibility. Very wise, proverbial guy, and this wisdom is the best you need. And there's a lot, like, if you keep studying, it's gonna, I don't know. I just think it's really interesting what he says. Kathy?
Well, the thing about many books is they don't profit our soul like the one book does.
Yeah.
God's book is all that we really need for this life. So that profits our soul, whereas all these other books don't profit our soul.
Yeah. Yeah, well put. Rick, and then Chase, and then we'll move on to the next question.
Did I raise my hand?
Oh, a second ago, you had it up. Sorry, I was going back to you. You know, it's okay. Chase? Sorry. Don't be sorry.
No, that verse just stood out to me a lot too, because I feel like it's always like, oh, you should read more. That's always the advice is, and this makes me feel less guilty about being not such a bookworm. It's
Yes.
it's excessive to the body, okay?
Yeah.
So it makes me happy. I like it.
Well, that brings up the question, like, what is the balance here, right? Because obviously, I don't think he's saying you should never read.
No, before that he's talking about preachers writing.
Yeah.
Just before that, writing words of truth.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, he's not full on just crediting it, but I like how he does, like, draw a line.
Sure. Adam?
I had a similar thing come up today. I was doing a thing at work, right? As we get older, we know these things. We've read the books. We know the word. And it's more of how we're going to continue on moreover. That now that we're older, what kind of person are we going to become?
Yeah.
We are
Yeah.
So,
you're kind of saying this, that at some point you have to quit reading and get to action. I think maybe it goes with Cass's point, right? Maybe part of this is saying, hey, like, you can keep studying. This book has enough for you to do. And if you just give yourself to think, I'm going to need to find all the answers before I do anything, or to kind of get all the answers, there is good to reading. He's not saying don't read, all right, or study. But I think maybe the point I take away from this is that you can consume yourself and wear yourself out, always searching for the next trick or answer. But the point of it maybe is just to get involved with it, to be shepherded by them, and to be goaded by them in the right direction, and not overexert yourself on always searching for the better way to put it, or the better author of that idea. I don't know, because I think, that's all I have to say about this. Any other thoughts about that idea or verse? Brett?
Well, if you do
The line, the words of scholar, when he talks about there's much study is wearisome to the flesh, and many books there's no end to it. It kind of reminds me of Festus telling Paul, much learning has made you mad. There is this attitude, even in the ancient world, that some of the craziest ideas come from the most quote-unquote scholarly humans, right?
Yeah.
Who spend too much time in that and not enough time in what's important. And on a simplistic note, I just think this is kind of a contrast between two things. It says, the words of scholars like well-driven nails given by one shepherd. Okay, the wisdom is given by one shepherd versus many, many books written by men, right?
Yeah.
And so that I feel like that is the contrast being made here.
Yeah.
And perhaps that's the point you were making, and I haven't
said it
added
better
anything
than I
to it. But I think it's just that juxtaposition, I believe.
Yeah. No, you said it better than I did. That's great. We're going to close the book on those verses. You can go back if you want, but I think that's really well put. So as he gets to the conclusion of this book, what's the conclusion for us? The end of the matter in verse 13, right? These are maybe the most famous words from a book that has lots of famous words in it. But what is the end of the matter? Everything's been heard. I just love the audacity of that statement. Everything's been heard. What's the conclusion for us? Fear God, keep his commandments. I like Todd's translation. This is all of man. This is man's all. I love that. What translation is that? Is that New King James? Yeah, I love that. There's so many things that translation gets so right. I love that. Mine says this is the whole duty of man. It's pretty, that's too kind of like, I don't know. Well, this is the man's all is so well put. What truth about God is this idea connected to in verse 14? He's a judge. Good. There's multiple truths, right? He's going to judge everything. And what's included in everything? Every good thing, every evil thing. What else is said? What other descriptor? Every secret thing. Do we like that verse? Does that verse make us feel good? It's tough, right? Like,
That's one that grabs you and goes, that thought, Rick. Better back off that one or that intention.
Yeah, on the next slide, I actually have some of your guys' moments from this week, your worst moments, actually. You want to see it? You know, that's like the idea here, right? That God's putting up on the screen for us all your worst moments that you thought no one else saw. And also, all the good things you did that you didn't get any praise for, that no one ever thanked you for, that you thought just went into the void and you wondered, why did I even do that? God saw those too. This reminds you of any other verses in the Bible? Maybe many, right? For me, it directs me towards Matthew 6, where Jesus is talking about our praying and our giving and our fasting. And every one of those sections, you know how he ends it? Your Father who sees in what? Secret will reward you. A lot of times you think about this idea of God judging every action of ours. And for good reason, because we're flawed people and we all have our sins and our mistakes, we get real nervous. But the uplifting kind of high standard and opportunity here as well, it ought not to be missed with all the negativity that can come with this. Every secret thing, every good secret thing that no one else saw, that you did just to do it because it's the right thing to do and the good thing to do, God sees those too, and he will be proud of those. He is proud of those. I mean, think about Job, right? There's things Job did I think no one else knew but God. Every weekend, making a sacrifice for his kids in the off chance that they might have sinned, right? And God says, look at Job. Have you seen him? He's awesome, right? That's kind of the perspective that God had on Job. And similarly, all the man's all here, the whole duty of man is to fear God and keep his commandments, because God's going to bring everything into judgment. Everything's secret, and it doesn't matter if it's good or evil. I mean, it does matter, but all those are going to be brought to him as well. And these are huge concepts, and they should, as awesome as they are, they also are foreboding. This book was written before Jesus Christ. It's notable to say and to see. And this book, like much of the Old Testament, leaves us with a lingering question. I'm cooked, right? Like, this book should leave us with a question. I can't do this. Like, there's no hope. There's no hope for me, especially as the book is written. It's directed towards people who are just living in this world. It's not even necessarily directed to religious people. It's not even directed towards Christians directly. I mean, we read it and it's good for us. And so this idea begs for a Messiah. This book begs for the gospel, for the good news that God is going to help us in judgment. Jesus Christ is our advocate. He is our atonement. There's all these beautiful thoughts, not just beautiful thoughts, these beautiful actions and solutions that God gives us in his son, Jesus Christ, and the good news about his death, burial, and resurrection. And so this book is, I think, such a great launching pad and runway for the gospel. As it ends, you just see everything God is setting up, that if you understand all the truths of this, even this last conclusion, we shouldn't read this and be like, all right, I got that in hand. I can do it. God, just watch me. I'll do everything perfect from here on out because I know the conclusion now. Really, this conclusion ought to drive us to our knees and pray to God that we could be full of his Spirit, follow in the footsteps of his Son, walk worthy of the gospel calling, and be forgiven by the blood of Jesus. Because without that, there's no hope. Anyway, that's my little sermon at the end of Ecclesiastes. What other final thoughts do you have as we wrap up? Todd?
Well, including every secret thing, I think of, I run a lot of construction meetings at my job, and I always don't like to get to the old business where we're where we had issues that we have to deal with, and everybody gets contentious. I don't like that part. You know, that's tough. But they get on the table and they're thrown out there, and you have to address them. So I think when I think of this verse, I think it's a verse that we should really reflect on and look back at our lives. When we take the Lord's Supper, for example, we examine ourselves. And I think this is a good verse for us to consider all the things that we are doing, have done, and are we getting out of those things? And are we going to be able to stand before God in a good way? You know, it's kind of like when the boss comes to the job or whatever, you know, look busy, or you really have a sincere attitude and you're actually working, but you weren't before he was there. You know, it's a time of reflection.
Yeah.
You know, or this verse is a serious reflection for me. I think it's just pretty deep, you know, in that
Amen.
Way to look at it, I guess.
I agree. I totally agree. Good. What other thoughts do we have? Go ahead, Rick.
I was thinking what you said earlier about without Christ, we wouldn't have no hope. He's our advocate. In spite of everything that we do, even when we're spot on, in those times that we aren't spot on, and the times that we are, you know, and all over the place. God, you know, like the Apostle Paul, remove this thorn and, you know, whatever it was. Remove this, please. Don't worry about it. My grace is sufficient.
Yeah.
But keep everything in mind, just what you said, what everybody else said. Put it all together, and you're still going to be short.
Yeah.
But then, you know, another statement you made that when he wrote this, God and him, and well, Jesus was there.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
He understood what was. I'm convinced that he understood mankind.
Yeah.
Just like God the Father understood mankind.
Yeah.
And what was ahead of him, even in the beginning, like John says, he was there in the beginning. Man, Solomon, David. You know, you just go make the list and go down the list, and if those individuals didn't have God and didn't understand His ways and His people and doing what He wants you to do, there would be no hope.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, faith. So, it's like the prophet Habakkuk says, right, that the righteous man will live by faith, right? Maria.
It also mentions in the chapter it says there's like a fear of heights, so like the terrors of the road, or for another example, a fear of sushi.
Yeah, fear of sushi.
Well, I think some people are, but I don't know who is.
I gotcha. I gotcha. Yeah. No, there's a lot that comes with old age, right? A lot of fears that are go along with it. I'm glad you pointed that out. Yeah, there's a lot in here. It's just good to see. Like these are for us, right? Just as you wrap this up, like this ought to make us reflect, like you were pointing out, Todd, like everyone was pointing, that our hope is in our faith in God. Even after all this, Ecclesiastes writes about so many circumstances about life being enjoyed or not enjoyed, or life being miserable or having no meaning here on earth. But the conclusion is for everybody, wherever we find ourselves in this book or don't find ourselves in these 12 chapters, it doesn't matter. The conclusion is that everyone can fear God and keep His commandments. Everyone can live like this, and we ought to, because this is man's all. So Proverbs, talks to us about the good life lived by wisdom. Ecclesiastes shows us that wisdom can only take us so far. That even wisdom has an end. And next week we're going to start the book of Job. We'll start with an overview, and Job's going to kind of make us ask, what if wisdom isn't enough? Like these are the kind of there's three perspectives in the poetry and wisdom, I think really directly about wisdom, and Job's going to be the third side of this wisdom triangle in the wisdom literature. So this is the end of Ecclesiastes, but next week we'll pick up in the book of Job. So I appreciate you all. I love you all. There's some questions here to get us started on the book of Job next week, but read as much as you can of Job before next Wednesday. It'll serve you. So thank you all. Love you all. It's good for class tonight.